genetic structure another term for mind, or is the mind just the programming in the genes, but not the genes themselves? Now, who knows the answer to that? What do you think, Mark? Mind is the programming that's in the genes. It's not the genes themselves anymore. But it's certainly programming that's in the genes. Mind. Okay, now, the second question is the mind all the programming in a vehicle, or just some of it? Is the vehicle's mind different from the strain's mind? Every individual vehicle has some variance from its strain. Just like on a plant, on a green plant, every leaf is a little different from every other leaf, even though they're all off the same vine. But none of those leaves are identical. Some leaves are a little bigger, some are a little smaller, some of the veins go a little bit more to the left, to the right, or a little longer or something. And depending upon the offspring, each time there's an offspring, of course, that offspring is a little bit more different from the strain, but there would be certain characteristics that still carry in the strain. Certain characteristics, but there would be a lot of characteristics that were in addition to the strain characteristics. You follow that? And let's see if that answers that. Is the mind all the programming in a vehicle, or just some of it? The mind is all the programming that is in the genes of that vehicle. Okay, the third question is the mind of the strain just the living programming of a particular strain, or is it also the same program outside the strain in unrelated vehicles? I don't understand the question. But the answer is, the question again, is the mind of the strain just the living programming of a particular strain, or is it also the same program outside the strain in unrelated vehicles? That doesn't make any sense. Well, the mind of the strain is the common characteristics that are in the strain. Whatever those common characteristics are that are in the strain. Do you understand that? Now, each individual in the strain will have some of those characteristics that are in the strain itself, plus the characteristics that more surround that individual vehicle. Just don't forget there's such thing as mutation, there's such thing as conscious mutation and unconscious mutation. Now, what we mean by that is you've got to think of what's genetically in the vehicle as a result of being an offspring is only part of what is genetically in the vehicle. It's everything that was passed down as a combination of those genes from its parents, plus it's the influences that have gone into, that have been taught and programmed into those genes since birth. And both of those play a major role. You can't really say that one is greater than the other. Do you follow that? Does everybody understand that? Well, nutrition would play a part, but we're also talking about influence of knowledge and conduct and so forth. Not only is passed down to you by the experiences that have been programmed into the genes of your parents, but then you add to that programming the experiences and the things that you listen to and the circumstances that you come into, so that actually your genes would have and enlarged programming. That's the reason that each generation develops more in some ways, and like they're more intelligent in general as they develop, even though their conduct may get worse through certain periods of time. Do you follow that? Like some of you all probably, if you went back to kindergarten and first grade and compared to what kindergarten and first grade was when you were there, you'd say, good night, this is bad. And yet you could see that their conduct is probably poorer at this particular time. Now, at certain times, their conduct may be better than their predecessors, because that pendulum swings in different directions depending upon what experiences need to happen at that time. Just because their conduct is bad at that particular time doesn't necessarily mean that ultimately it's a bad, because those bad experiences can be a growing process. When you're confronted with bad and you go against bad, or you experience bad, and then later you learn that experiencing that bad is wrong, and you change it, then you have become something more desirable genetically than you were prior to that experience. So even though at the moment it may seem bad, ultimately it's not bad if the individual's programming continues to go in a progressive way towards being a better creature. Okay, the reason for that is to make the strain significant. Otherwise, the strains genes would be changed too much. In order to have significant strain pass on, they do most of the reproducing at early stages. Genetically. Well, sometimes if they're attracted to one and the same kind of weakness, it's usually a rebound. It's usually a sublimation. It's like, well, let's take, just for sake of discussion, because it might not be this accurate this way, but let's take lesbian, for example. And let's say that the genes in that lesbian have developed in a way that really the next level of experiment in that direction has decided that that particular family strain at that point should cease. And then that lesbian finds company in others with the same short circuiting. And it's not really necessarily a sickness or weakness, it's just been cut off. It's just like finding company in those that find themselves in that circumstance. And then they have all kinds of other tests, very significant and potent tests, by choosing to primarily find company of same characteristics.
Eventually, the reproducing will stop anyway. And but so the type of genetic programming will be a different curve. It will be mutation.
Well, and it won't be reproducing the way they're reproducing, because the way they're reproducing is very primitive method of reproducing. What is that?
The mutation method.
Oh, yes. Now, you know that you...
What what mutation is? That's where you meet somebody and you don't reproduce. It's like the same sex will get be influenced by the other genes, but there's no reproducing, passing on to offspring.
Let's take a heterosexual who is going to reproduce, but can still be extremely influenced by a good friend or someone who can reproduce, and the genes can change in that individual by that relationship. You know, this even happens in corn. You know what we're saying? Like, yes, like ears of corn can, in their closeness together, can influence each other and even change genetically. It can take on genetic characteristics as the other one. So it's not just a verbal thing. It's a close association thing. Now, maybe by the time it gets to human kingdom, maybe it is mainly limited to verbal, but it may be more than verbal as well. In a sense, from a theory standpoint and philosophical standpoint, the lesbian is ahead of the others because they've outgrown that reproductive element, even though in another sense the next level has chosen in those experiments that are still choosing to reproduce, it has chosen to go ahead and develop things. In other words, it doesn't necessarily mean it's become rotten in order to stop the reproductive process. Do you follow what we're saying? Because they aren't stopping to reproduce because they are not having offspring. They're still reproducing. And but then comes the responsibility of what is the quality of your reproduction. You see what I'm saying? Because your reproduction is not strain. Can you understand this? Your reproduction is influence. If you are not having offspring, then your reproduction is influence. And so there's a greater responsibility on your influence at that point than there is on one who is still reproducing offspring. Now, ultimately, none of this is as important to you all as the fact that you realize that you brought in programming. You brought in next level, and you are still bringing in programming. You're bringing in next level mind. You are mutating with the little mind of your vehicle. You are influencing it. You are adding to it. And during your presence, the mind that occupies that, your vehicle, is many, 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 many times greater than the mind that would be occupying that vehicle were you not present. But you're actually mixing your programming with the programming that is present in the genes of your little vehicle. And after a while, it adapts to a certain amount of it and even cooperates, like we've talked about lately, with a certain amount of it. And it's even honored. Even the vehicle feels an amount of honor by the presence of the next level mind. Do you follow that? And
actually, it's happening in both ways. It's happening to the next level mind. But what we feed people in communities and things like that. In other words, you're covered inside and out.
yes, in other words, you're getting mutation from all directions. You're actually also your next level mind is accepting mutation. In other words, your next level mind is receiving the programming from this experience, which it will take back with it. Do you follow that? It's getting all this information added to it that it would not have had before because it's never had this kind of experience before, for the most part. A few of you might have, or some of you might have, but that's not our consideration. We don't care. The important thing is that that you learn from all these experiences. If you had had this experience before, it would have been at a very, very more primitive level of civilization than where you're getting it now. Do you follow that? So, but the point is, how well can you get service out of the combined programming of your next level mind and your little vehicle? In other words, how well can you keep it from interfering with you, and how well can you make it a tool for bringing in more next level mind? Because what we are hoping that you are desperate for now is accelerated bringing in of more of your individual next level mind, so that you have all of the basic characteristics that are common to even beginners, that you have forced all of those basic characteristics into the program sufficiently to be able to count on in your conduct, in your observation, in the way you look at things, and not let the vehicle influence you to revert to its interpretation of things, seeing things